Forum is a nonprofit organization, and we have actually been around for over 37 years. And what we do is we create content and organize over 70 programs and events that support the global technology and startup ecosystem. We also create programs and conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we also provide resources to encourage and support women in leadership roles. We do a lot more than that. We work with many different countries on different initiatives and programs, from executive to government to startups. So I encourage you to take a look at our website at siliconvalleyforum.com and check out all the stuff that we do. So thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Denise. Really appreciate it. All right, we're having a few more people jumping into the room. If you just joined us, feel free to pull up your chat bar. We'll be using that during the webinar here. Feel free to say hello where you're calling in from. This is truly a global audience right now, which is just amazing. You know, I think that's one thing that we've all realized during this period of change, is that we're so connected, and it's easier than you can imagine to stay connected to people all around the world. And I just think it's unbelievable. So if you haven't noticed, there is a little recording icon in the top corner here. So we will be recording this this webinar. It'll be up on our website, on our startupedia.info website later today or tomorrow. So feel free to access it for reference later on. As I said, the chat function is there for us to use as a way to converse during this webinar. And at the end, we'll be talking about our next one. But for now, let's get going. So this is our second webinar in our series with Chris Yeh, the author, investor, entrepreneur, and superstar friend of Silicon Valley Forum. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you on again, and looking forward to your comments about how to craft that perfect startup story. Chris, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Many thanks, Nick. And I just want to confirm, we are scheduled for an hour or so?
About an hour, yes.
Okay, great. I'll do my best to get through things relatively quickly then, because there's a lot of fun stuff that we can do. I was also going to offer one other pro tip from doing these endless webinars. So one of the things that happens if you're like me and you are nearsighted or farsighted and you don't like wearing contact lenses, is that you wear these glasses and there could be like a glare from the computer screen or various other things. So the pro tip for how to actually fix this, and it's a little uncomfortable in some ways, but if you put your glasses on so they're actually tilted downwards, that means that the angle means they're not going to reflect things as much. It actually looks a little funny. It's like heading up the head instead of over the ears.
We're all going to be moving our glass.
But at least when I face forward, you don't see all the glare. So it all works out just for the best. So for all, because I saw a couple of people on the line with glasses, I was going to give them that pro tip for Zooming meetings around. I'll also say that it was funny this morning. I gave a talk to an audience of African entrepreneurs. And one of the fellows had actually changed his first name legally to African Farmer. And I thought that was great branding. And I'm going to look into trying to find the legal paperwork to change my name to Zoom Expert Yay. And that will be a good thing. All right, so what I'm going to do today is to run through some of the information I talk about in terms of storytelling. I'm actually going to share a screen so that you guys can see slides. So let me just make sure that that is working. And actually, I need to, hold on, let me go into slideshow mode first. There we go. Which one is it? Okay, great. So let me go to Zoom. I do have a slideshow up. Here we go. Perfect. I just didn't notice it at first. All right, and I'm going to talk about storytelling. And storytelling is one of my favorite topics because I do think it's so important. And it's one of those things where I think that many people don't bother to actually learn the basics of storytelling. So this is going to be a refresher for some, but it'll focus on the basics of storytelling, and it will include the one weird trick, clickbait style, the one weird trick that I use to make stories more compelling and that I encourage entrepreneurs to use. And then if I'm able to get through this quickly enough, one of the things we'll do at the end, for those who actually are brave enough to volunteer, is we may have one or two people give me their pitch, and then I'll repitch it for them. And the beauty is, since this is being recorded, you know, have access to the recording, you can actually go back and refer to that repitch if you think it's better than your pitch. So let's talk about storytelling. The first question is, what is a story? So the question, as we look at this particular story here, the king died and the queen died. Do you guys think that that's a story? I don't know. Well, you know, it really doesn't have the kind of emotional heft we're looking for. I mean, there's tragedy here. There's people dying. But what are we to make of it? Well, if we go on to the next slide, we can see that what makes it a story is the narrative, the emotional grief. All of a sudden, when the king died and the queen died of grief, the elements are tied together. There is a larger coherence rather than just a series of events. And that's really what makes a story. A story is something that helps us make sense of the world. It's a way to take the events that occur, all the things that happen in our lives, and figure out how they actually make sense. And once you have that strong narrative, not only does it help you make sense of things, it helps you get other people to see the sense that you've made of things. Stories are how we explain the world. I stole this from Pixar. One of the Pixar storytellers put this online a number of years ago. But their formula, and you can see it work for every Pixar movie, is to say that once upon a time there was blank. That's the setting. Every day, blank. So we're establishing the status quo. One day, blank. That's the inciting incident. Because of that, blank. Because of that, blank. Until finally blank. And what you're seeing is the narrative chains together a series of events and consequences to form meaning. And let's see how this actually plays out if we look at an individual story. So I often like to use the story of Lyft. You can use the same Pixar formula, which is to say, once upon a time, there were taxi cabs. Every day, travelers would hope a cab would be there when they needed it. But even if it came, cab was probably dirty and uncomfortable. One day, Lyft gave travelers the ability to summon a car with a polite driver just using their phones. Because of that, people switched to using it, people switched to driving, and the evil taxi cabs went away and everyone was happier. I can speak about this from personal experience because I still remember this one time in 1996, I believe it was. I was in San Francisco. I was still living in Boston, and I was doing some work with Bank of America. And this was the point in time at which there was none of that stuff down around. There was no ballpark. All that area down there was just empty wasteland. And I was at a Bank of America facility down in what they call China Basin Landing. And I got done on a Friday night. And then I had a long way to go to my hotel, which was back on Market Street. And I tried to get a cab and I couldn't. And we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have Uber. We didn't have any of this stuff. And I ended up having to walk the entire time with my bags in the rain. Suffice to say, I will never forget that. You will probably never forget that either. And that is why a story like this is so powerful, because it taps into our personal experiences and makes it something that we really grasp at a visceral level instead. So why are you telling a story? Well, the reason you're telling the story is to persuade the audience. If you persuade the audience to do what you want, then the story was a good story. And if you don't persuade them to do what you want, then the story wasn't good enough. And the implication is whether the story is good depends on the audience, not just you. So you can be a master storyteller. You can have all the voices in the world, do some fancy accents. I'm not really good at some accents. Like I tell people the only accent I could do reliably is corrupt Southern sheriff. I can't even do a good Arnold Schwarzenegger impression. But you know, these are all just skills of storytelling, but they don't determine whether your story is successful or not. What determines whether your story is successful or not is whether you connect with the audience. So the key to that is to know your audience. I often like to paraphrase the great Prussian military strategist Karl von Clausewitz, who said that war is fought by people. Well, you know, your audience, it's people. And whether it is the software is bought by people, donations are made by people, or what have you, the fact is that people are at the heart of everything. And your audience, they don't really care what you do. Well, I hate to break it to you. It is not the case that everyone else out there cares about you. Nobody cares about you. What they care about is what you do to their lives. As Mel Brooks once put it, tragedy is when I get a paper cut, comedy is when you fall into a sewer and die. And as a result of that, you really have to put yourself into the shoes of your audience and understand what matters to them, what they're trying to accomplish, and how you can help them accomplish something that matters. The way you do that is by researching and sometimes just asking them. And this is the step that most people don't take enough seriously, which is to figure out right away, what is it that the audience actually wants? Now, I promised you one weird trick that would allow you to do some fancy stuff. And here is the one weird trick. When people tell a story, the usual way they tell the story is they talk about, say we're giving a pitch, you talk about the problem, you talk about the solution, and then you talk about the success that people will have if they adopt your solution. Makes sense, right? That's the order of things, the way things go. There's a problem, here's a solution, here's what happens as a result. And yeah, everyone tells the story this way, but it's not actually the best way to tell the story because it doesn't produce dramatic tension. I want you to think about it in a slightly different way. If you just flip the order around and you start off with the problem, then talk about the success that people will have, and then only then talk about the solution, you actually end up creating this remarkable sense of dramatic tension. And what I mean by that dramatic tension is, as you hear about the problem, you're processing it, and then you hear about the success, all the wonderful things that can happen. And that sets up a tension in your mind as you're saying, well, I know the problem is a serious problem, and I know that the success really sounds great, but I don't know how you're going to get from point A to point C. What's the intermediate step? What's the thing that's going to allow this to happen? And you're building up this desire to know the answer to the question. I call it the feeling of something clicking into place. And those of you who like mystery novels or watch movies with a twist, like before M. Night Shyamalan ruined them, when you do that, you know the satisfaction of seeing everything click into place. If you think about a movie, a classic movie like the Usual Suspects, at the end you see everything click into place and it suddenly feels very satisfying. If you think about a movie like The Sixth Sense, you see everything click in place and it feels satisfying. That's what I want you to do when you're telling the story. And you do that by changing the order and talking about the success. What is going to be impacted in people's lives, how their lives are going to be changed for the better before you talk about the solution. And then after that, you can follow it up because they're going to say, well, wow, that solution would be amazing if it actually does what you say it does, but does it do that? Well, that's what the proof points are for. And when you're doing a pitch, of course, you actually have to ask for what you're looking for, how much money you're raising, et cetera, et cetera. All the stuff still applies. This is just about the basic narrative around the problem and solution. So how do you become a good storyteller? Well, you have to practice a lot. And I can tell you that I have delivered in my life, probably pitched hundreds of times just for my own companies and thousands of times overall. And so I've gotten pretty good at it, but it's because I've done this stuff over time. The very first time I did an investor pitch, I don't think it was great. I think it was pretty good, but it wasn't great and they didn't invest. This was, by the way, Bank of America's venture arm, if you can believe that, in 1999. So Bank of America used to be not part of Nations Bank. It used to have a venture capital practice. And that was the very first venture capital firm that ever got to allow me to make a pitch to them. I still remember going to San Francisco, delivering the pitch. It wasn't great. They didn't invest, but it was part of the educational process. Now, if I'd been smarter about it, what I would have done is take the advice I'm about to give you, which is instead of practicing on investors, find other people to practice on. And that is really based on the principle of rapid prototyping. So Tom Chi, who's a co-founder of Google X, who's now a venture capitalist himself, really brilliant guy. You should hear him speak if you ever get a chance. I think that he's going to give a workshop on Friday, actually, for the company Invisible, which is an AI-based company. So look up Tom Chi and Invisible, and you might get a chance to check it out. He's a really great speaker and somebody well worth listening to. Anyways, what Tom says is to maximize the rate of learning, you have to minimize the time it takes you to try things. And if the only way you're going to learn from delivering a pitch is you learn each time you drive up to San Francisco or go to Sand Hill Road and you deliver a pitch, or rather, I guess these days it's just go on Zoom. But you have to go through all this process to set up a pitch with a venture capitalist, and then you learn from it. Well, that's pretty slow because it takes time to get those appointments, to do all this stuff. Instead, you can do the rapid prototyping equivalent by just pitching to anyone who's willing to play the role of the audience, even if they can't write you a check for millions of dollars. Because the difference between pitching to yourself, like people always say, oh, look at yourself in the mirror. I'm like, guess what? That feels pretty weird, A. And B, when people claim they're pitching to themselves in the mirror, they're not actually pitching to themselves in the mirror. They're actually like, yeah, and so slide 1, I'm going to do this. Slide 2, I'm going to do this. Slide 3, I'm going to do this. You're not actually pitching. That's not real practice. Real practice is going through and delivering it to a real person. And the only way to fool your body into believing it's a real person is to have a real person on the other side. So how do you do that? Well, think about all the different people that you could get. You could get a friend, a spouse, a roommate, a college friend, random strangers on the street. It doesn't matter. As long as they agree to hear your story, it's a great chance to pitch. And that'll work out a lot of the kinks. In fact, as you guys know, I'm an author and I write books. One of the important steps for any of these books is when we've locked in the structure of the book, when we've got all the stories in place, when the book is getting close to final, one of the steps I take is to actually sit down and read the entire book, end to end, out loud. And it's because when you read a book out loud, you are forced to hear everything that actually goes on. You'll hear all the things that are awkward, all the things that are off. And that's the same thing that's going to happen when you pitch. When you pitch to a real human being, you're going to hear the time, you're going to recognize that didn't feel right. I'm not sure if that works. That joke kind of falls flat. It's the same principle that Chris Rock or any other comedian uses to build out a stand-up routine. The way that Chris Rock builds his stand-up routine is actually quite remarkable. He'll go to these comedy clubs and people will be very excited. It wasn't announced. It's like all of a sudden, hey, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Rock. They're like, oh my God, Chris Rock is here. And he'll get up on stage, but instead of doing what he does in all those movies and shows you've seen on HBO, Netflix, or whatever, where he gets up and he's got the outfit on, and he's talking to the camera, he's got good expressions, everything like that. Chris Rock comes out on stage, he's got glasses on, he's got a sheet of papers, and then he's like, okay. And he reads a joke, and he sees what the reaction of the audience is. And if they laugh or don't laugh, whatever, he scribbles a note down, goes to the next one, and then reads that one. So it's very different than going and delivering an entire stand-up routine, but it allows him to very rapidly learn about which jokes are working. So to put it all together, let's focus on how it all works. Telling a story is the best way of explaining yourself, explaining your company, explaining what you're up to, whatever it happens to be. The purpose of telling a story is to persuade your audience to do something, i.e. you want to get them to take action. Maybe it's to write a check, maybe it's to join your company. It doesn't matter. Understand what your purpose is. And the way you're going to achieve that is to know your audience, research them, ask them, figure out what actually matters to them, what they want, so that you can make sure that whatever you're offering them is going to help them solve their story, help them achieve their happy ending. There's the one weird trick of leveraging dramatic tension, which we're going to demonstrate in a bit. And then finally, practice, practice, practice. So that is the core storytelling content I want to offer. The two things I want to do next are, first of all, I want to go ahead and give you guys a chance to ask questions. Looks like we've got some things in chat. So Nick, do you want them to ask the questions in the chat or in the Q&A?
I think it's better just to ask them in the chat, just so we don't overload it as much. So feel free to jot down any questions. Chris, if you want, you could just read them directly from there, or I could hop in and answer them if that's a lot.
So I've got chat popped up, so that is fine. So I can certainly see them right now if people want to ask questions. So if people have questions, go ahead and ask questions. And then what you can also do, if you don't have a question, but you want to volunteer that you're going to tell your story and then let me repitch it, first come, first serve. This is your chance as well. All right, so I'll start answering questions while we get some brave volunteers. What is your favorite book? That's a question from Boss. That is an excellent question. There's so many books, and it really depends on whether you're talking about favorite book to read for insights or favorite book to read because I just enjoy it. So, for example, last year, I actually injured myself pretty badly. I tore my Achilles tendon playing basketball, which meant that I was stuck in my house for a couple of months and actually stuck lying in bed for about a month, which was pretty bad. It sucked a lot. And one of the things I did during that time is I brought out my Kindle Paperwhite. And one of the things I read was I went ahead and reread the entire Lord of the Rings, which is a classic, obviously, story. Many people know it. Even more people have seen the movie. And it was just a great opportunity to go and dive deep into something. So I do enjoy that. There's no real purpose to reading it other than just enjoyment, but it is something that is deeply seeped into all our minds. If you think about this being a storytelling workshop, then it makes sense to go ahead and tap into one of the most resonant stories. Another favorite book that I'll mention, sort of from a business perspective, and again, not one of my own books, because obviously my favorite books are the ones I've written. You guys should all buy them and go to Amazon and find them. But in terms of business books, one of the books that I really like is this obscure out-of-print book called The Entrepreneur's Manual that was written in the 1970s. And I don't know why it's out of print. I think it's a great book. It's got really practical advice. Again, it's got all these sort of weird 1970s lingo in it and everything like that. But I found it to be enormously helpful. And I still have a couple of copies. I was able to get them pretty cheap on Amazon as used books. Final book, this is not for entrepreneurs, but just in general, because not everyone on the call is an entrepreneur, although perhaps everyone is, a book for success in life. The classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think is still a classic after all these years. And again, sometimes they update the version, so they're not talking about examples like Charles Schwab, no, not the brokerage guy, but rather the guy who worked for Andrew Carnegie back in the 19th century running US Steel. And so these are really old examples, but it still rings true. And if I were to summarize How to Win Friends and Influence People in one word, it is that the best way to win friends and influence people, which, by the way, is to be successful in life, is to have a sincere interest in other people. And that's really what the book is all about. It's just saying, hey, can you find ways to take a sincere interest in what other people have to teach you? And if you do that, I think good things are going to happen. So there's a question from Angelica. Hi, Angelica. Always good to see you. How long should the story be, and do you have various versions? So that's an excellent question. The first thing to do is to figure out how to have the most effective story. And the length of the story is such that there probably is a maximally effective length. Anybody who's ever watched a movie and thought, geez, this movie is way too long, knows that more is not always better. But at the same time, less is not always better, right? You should practice and see, if you don't have any time constraint, if you're not rushing to finish, if you're not trying to stretch it out, what is the amount of time that it takes to really make it work? Like, for example, when I deliver a talk about blitzscaling, and I have a series of stories and jokes and all the things I like to tell, I find that the ideal amount of time for me to take with one of those talks is a little over an hour, and then leave the rest for Q&A. Now, there are times when people say you only have half an hour. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to give a shorter version of it. I don't think it's as effective, but you also need to be able to do shorter versions of it. And when it comes to the story that you're telling, you need, at the very least, the most effective length. So whatever length it is that allows you to tell the story best. And then the other thing you definitely need is the elevator pitch. You've heard the expression elevator pitch. I guess these days it would be more of a Zoom pitch and a rapid Zoom pitch. But it's like, can you deliver a 280 character pitch? Can you boil it down to its essence so that people grasp immediately what you're trying to say? And that's going to make it harder, right? We will experiment with this when we do some of the pitch volunteers, because I can work on the truly condensed down version as well as the more expanded version. So let's see, other questions. Wow. What, in your opinion, so this is from Barclay, what would be the most effective opening line in a pitch? So it's going to vary from pitch to pitch, but I think that the most effective opening line is something along the lines of, have you ever, or do you often find yourself blank? And the reason is, we're trying to establish the problem. And the ideal thing is to establish a problem in a way that the person on the other end grasps intuitively based on their own experience. And so asking a question that gets them nodding their head, that puts the right frame of mind, frame of reference, gets them thinking about the pain involved, that's how I like to open up a pitch. And it's ideal if you can make it relevant to them. Now, that may not always be relevant to them. Like, for example, I have a company that I've invested in the pandemic is actually helping do very well. It's called Kia, K-E-A, .ai. And what they do is they have AI phone agents that take orders for pizza restaurants and wing restaurants. And it turns out that if you look at like Domino's and Wingstop and restaurants like that, they still do something like 80% of their orders over the telephone. And their primary marketing vehicle is not, ads on Facebook or ads on what Google or something like that. Their primary marketing vehicle is the old magnet stuck to the refrigerator. And so the thing with that company is, if I were to pitch them, if you go to a VC and you ask, when's the last time you ordered a pizza from Domino's? The answer is when I was in college, because they're all rich and they don't do that anymore. So what you have to do instead is you have to ask a slightly different question, which is, what do you think is the percentage of orders for a Domino's or Wingstop that's taken by telephone? They're like, I don't know, 40%, 50%. You say, actually, the answer is 80%. And those 80% among those restaurants represent $300 billion a year worth of orders. That's a pretty big market. And that's a problem for those restaurants. And then you can launch into the problem. Right? You establish first the size of the problem if it's not something they personally have experienced. All right, next question. What's your work day like from when you wake up till you go to bed? Well, prepare to be bored, because I'm going to give you way too much detail on this, but hopefully it will be useful. So when I get up, I'm usually awake before the rest of my family. So what I will do is, it's actually different now during the pandemic than it was before. What I do when I wake up is I go to my computer and I start by reading the news. And I want to find out what the hell happened in the world overnight, because usually some sort of crazy madness happened overnight. And even though I can't do anything about this pandemic, really, other than giving my opinions, I still like to feel like I'm informed. It's probably a waste of time, but I'll spend the first 30 minutes of the day reading the news, seeing what's happened. And that's a combination of looking at Google News, as well as looking at aggregators like Pop URLs, maybe taking a look at, I like to look at coverage from like the BBC, because I figure that American journalism is all polarized and slanted, but when they write about America, they might actually write something that is balanced. So that's what I do. Then from there, the next step is I'll go ahead and make myself a pot of coffee, because caffeine is really important. I never drank coffee before, but after studies came out about a decade or about 15 years ago showing that coffee was really good for you, I started drinking it. And now I discovered that once you start drinking it, you can't stop. So I've got to have coffee in the morning. I drink my coffee black, but no, I don't drink it black. I don't sweeten it, but I generally use unsweetened soy milk as the creamer. Like, I would prefer, cream or half and half. That would taste much better, but it's not very healthy. So that's why I use the unsweetened soy milk. And it's only then that I really start getting into the day. Now, for the rest of the day, so much is actually going to be driven off the calendar. Are there webinars I have to give? This morning, I got up and I came here at 7 a.m. to deliver a 2-hour talk to people in Africa. So that kind of sets up the day in a particular way. But most days, it's not like that. Most days, I'll have, my guess is somewhere around 4 to 5 different Zoom calls and meetings and the like that take up about half the day. And I'll spend some of the rest of the time trying to desperately catch up on my email, and then also do some of the actual work that I think is important, which is, for example, writing articles and pieces and essays and the like. So for example, if you check out my Twitter account today, just at Chris Yeh, CHRASYEH, you'll see that I retweeted a tweet from my co-author, Reid Hoffman. We just published an essay about how blitzscaling works during this pandemic, and talking specifically about how it impacts companies like Airbnb, where the industry is basically suffering through an extinction level event, and what you have to do in order to come out stronger on the other side. And that's the kind of thing where, it takes concentrated effort to actually write an essay like that. But then there's also all the follow-up, all the social media and the other stuff that happens. Then the final thing I would say is that during my day, there is more time being spent on certain things than there were before the pandemic. I think we spend more time cooking because we can't just go out to eat. So there's definitely that. There's more time spent shopping because you need to get supplies to cook. The kids aren't eating lunch at school or anything. So it's like everything goes much more quickly. And then finally, I would say that I have actually made a little bit of time for things to keep me sane. So I had been a very slow adopter of streaming services because I didn't feel like I had any time to watch anything. But because of the fact of the pandemic, because there is slightly more time, and just because I get burned out at some point in time, I don't feel like I want to just keep working. I actually have been using things like Amazon Prime Video and CBS All Access and other things like that and Netflix to watch various things. So the things I watch, I actually watched because CBS All Access made it free for a month. So I actually churned through and watched Star Trek Discovery and Picard because I'm an old-fashioned Star Trek fan, going back to watching the original series on syndication when I was growing up. And then on Amazon Prime right now, because I need something to watch when I'm on the exercise bicycle or something. Can't really type emails when I'm on the exercise bicycle. I've been watching Amazon's original series Upload, which is about a futuristic satire from the creator of from the co-creator of King of the Hill and Beavis and Butthead and things like that, Greg Daniels. And it's a near future satire about what happens in the world of the future when people can upload after they die. So that's a quick thing on the workday. And again, like I said, very boring, far more detail than you needed. S asks, does it make sense to tell more than one story to increase the probability of exciting more of the audience? This is if your solution solves more than one problem. How do investors see that? So you can only tell one story at a time. So you have to look at the audience, judge which is the most important segment of the audience, and pitch the story to them. Saying, I got 5 different things I could do, hopefully one of them fits you, is not the way to do it. You got to really hone in and focus on one. That being said, you may tell a different story to different audiences, and that's okay. Investors won't have a problem with your telling different stories to different people as long as it delivers results. As a passionate entrepreneur, I have 1,000 things to say. How do you prioritize what to put in your story? So this is where talking with other people can really help. When you're pitching and practicing to people, it's not just a question of having a warm body there. You would then ask them to play back to you. So what do you think what I said was all about? What are the key points? Because you have to be listening towards other people's reactions, really identifying those core nuggets, those individual sentences or stories or phrases that really stick. And so I always have my ear out trying to find things that stick. It also helps if they kind of rhyme or somehow sound catchy. So for example, I'm doing a broadcast tonight, doing a Stanford class on scaling. And so we're going to have a series of speakers tonight. It's Friday night at 6 p.m. You can check it out. Again, look on Twitter, Chris Yeh. And we called it Scaling and Prevailing because it sounds cool and people remember it. So try out different things, see which things actually stick. That's what your audience is for, and prioritize the things you put in your story. One of the things that is very tempting is to tell everything. And I'm like, no, don't tell everything. People are lazy. People have short attention spans. There are only 2 or 3 things they can remember at most. Make sure you choose the 2 or 3 things they're going to remember. Because if you say 1,000 things, they're going to choose the 2 or 3 things that they remember, and they may not be the ones that you want to remember. You want them to remember the fact that your startup is awesome, that your idea is $1 billion idea, and what they may remember is, oh, what was that tool that you used in order to do the customer survey? Great, I got to write that down. Or, hey, you watch Star Trek Picard? Yeah, that's pretty cool. I watched that too. You don't want them remembering that. You want them remembering why your startup is awesome. This one was actually privately, probably by accident. Oh, here we go. Now we ask publicly. Yeah, I do that too sometimes. I send a chat message and I do it privately by accident. So you've got to make sure your chat is set to send to everyone. What do you think makes one anxious before their pitch? And I would like to pitch. So that's our first volunteer, Praveen. We're going to remember that. We're going to get to you, I promise. What makes someone anxious before their pitch? Uncertainty. I mean, you desperately want someone to say yes. You want them to give you the millions of dollars. It could change your life. And so how can you not feel nervous before your pitch? I went on television last year. Actually, it's being replayed again this year. So not tonight, but a week from now, next Thursday night, you can actually watch me on Fox at 9 p.m. on the game show Mental Samurai, hosted by Rob Lowe. I filmed this back in October of 2018, and they showed it last year, and they're replaying it again this year. But let me tell you, when you're waiting to go on stage and you know it's going to be broadcast to a national television audience and millions of people are going to see you and you might flail miserably and look like a fool, you feel nervous. I felt nervous, and I've been on stage God knows how many times. So feeling nervous and anxious is very natural. The ways you overcome that is, first of all, like I said, you just do it a lot so that you can fall back on your habits. That's where all the practice, even with your random friends and college roommates and whatnot, is going to help you. Because even if you're nervous, you can fall back on the things that you have already done, and you can rely on the phrases that have sort of already embedded themselves in your mind. The second thing, and this is a trick, I think it works, I don't know, I don't actually do it myself, but I've heard from research it works, which is to tell yourself, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the upside. Accentuate the positive. Again, I don't actually do this one. I feel the anxiety, and I guess I already instinctively feel excited about the opportunity. And so I just tend to believe that things are going to go my way. And if you want to find out whether they did, tune in to Fox at 9 p.m. next Thursday night. And then let's see. I haven't forgotten, we're going to keep answering questions, and then we're going to come back and see how many volunteers we have for the pitching exercise. Xenia asks, what strategies do you recommend for storytelling during a time of crisis or rapid change like right now, where your audience's need may be changing or hard to know or assess? Oh, that's so important. So there's a couple of things that I would recommend. The first is to increase the amount of repetition. The reason is, the first time you tell the story, it may not sink in. People are distracted, they're looking around, they're not really certain. You may have to tell it over and over and over again in order for people to actually hear it. So that in order to make that work effectively, that also means you have to come up with a very simple summary, like a one sentence description that you, and a metaphor that you can harp on over and over again. So one of the ways I'm talking about COVID-19 and the pandemic that's in fact on business right now is I just picked a single metaphor and I'm hammering it over and over again. The single metaphor is, listen, you know, there's a lot of headwinds right now, but the people who are able to sail into the wind more effectively are going to be the ones who are best positioned for when the wind changes. And that's a very concrete metaphor. It's something that accurately conveys what I'm trying to get at. And it's memorable. You can picture in your mind the sailboat trying to sail into the wind, and then all of a sudden the wind changes. Now you're running before the wind. And if you've been able to gain ground while you're tacking and going back and forth, heading into the wind, you'll be in a much better position when things finally change. So simplicity, concreteness, something that is very visual and catching, that's what I would do in terms of storytelling during crisis. The final thing I would say is you are going to need to be ready to change things. So, you know, for example, things have changed rapidly. I gave an address to an audience of folks in the Middle East towards the beginning of this crisis, or towards the end of March. And my emphasis then was at helping to clarify for them, okay, is this going to be a rapid recovery? Is it going to take a while? And how bad could it get? And so I said, you know, a lot of people keep saying this is going to be V-shaped recovery. I don't think that's going to be the case. And here's the reasons why. And here are the things you need to look out for. Now, as we've gotten further along, it's pretty apparent to everyone there is no V-shaped recovery. I don't need to convince them of that. Now I have to shift to focusing on, well, what can you do during this time? And, you know, in another couple of months, hopefully, I'll shift towards what can you do to best play the rebound? What are the things you can do to shift to running before the wind? So things are going to change over this period of time. They can change very rapidly because of the situation we're in. And so you got to be even more adaptable than before. Baik asks, can the stories be different? Startup storytelling versus pitching a new business idea in an incumbent? Yes. So they are different because the audiences are different. So if you think about, you're pitching a startup, what you're pitching is, this is something that has a chance of succeeding. And you're pitching that to investors, you're pitching that to potential employees, co-founders, and so on and so forth. And everyone ultimately is kind of aligned once they get on board around the idea of this startup succeeds. And if it succeeds, it's good for all of us. If it fails, it's bad for all of us, and we want it to succeed. When you're pitching a new business idea in a dinosaur company, it's a very different story because the incentive structures are very different. If you think about it, if you think about innovation, a new initiative inside a big company, what would the ideal be for an executive of that company? Their ideal would be that you bring them an initiative that is guaranteed to succeed and that they can take credit for. Now, does that sound like anything you can actually do? No, it doesn't. so when you're pitching a new business inside an incumbent, you have to pitch towards their actual concerns, which are not necessarily whether the business succeeds or fails, but rather how it's going to improve their relative standing within the company, how it's going to put them on the track to becoming CEO, how it's going to put them on the track to getting onto that operating committee or whatever the case may be. You have to know your audience. And because the audience is different, the way you tell the story may be different, because the things that motivate them will be different. Nonetheless, the core notion of I'm going to tell you about a problem, I'm going to tell you about success, I'm going to tell you about a solution, allowing that dramatic tension to click things into place, that's probably going to be the same. Wow, these questions keep flowing in. What technology are you most passionate about investing in right now? So that's a question from Roger. So right now, I would say that I have gravitated towards artificial intelligence just because I know how much stuff we do just with human intelligence, and so much of the work is wasted. And I feel like, if you were to accurately categorize my time, I would say that a significant chunk of my time, far too much, is spent searching for the right tab in a browser window. I mean, seriously, how much time do all of us spend searching for the right tab in our browser windows? Is that really the best use of our brain power? Is that the kind of thing that we're adding value on, like searching for tabs and stuff like that? I don't think so. I think the AI has the potential to do a lot of stuff and to handle a lot of stuff that it just doesn't make sense to throw human beings at. And that may include things like understanding, maybe an AI will eventually be able to go through this particular broadcast and cut out a Sports Center style highlights package of the best 5 minutes. Who knows, right? That would take a human being quite a long time, but if an AI could do it effectively, that would be great. So I'm very interested in the AI side, and that's where things like Kia, the pizza ordering bot, comes in. The pizza order taking bot comes in. Boss asks, when is your Global Scaling Academy starting? Will it be subscription-based or free? So we are planning on building out as a result of it. So Global Scaling Academy is the organization that I set up to spread my ideas. Prior, what I would do is we would go to places like Qatar or Mexico City or Copenhagen and travel around the world and run workshops and stuff. Guess what? We're not doing that right now for obvious reasons. So what we're doing instead is we are building a community on the Mighty Networks platform where people can come in and interact with each other and with us and other thought leaders and things like that. I suspect it will be subscription based, but there will be a free trial. So you'll be able to at least there'll be some elements that are free and there will be some premium elements that'll be free trial, but we want people to come in and be a part of the community. So the question is, who is smarter, you or Reed? So one of the things I like to say when I was in college, I went to Stanford, and I started at Stanford when I was 15, is I would tell people, I'm the smartest person I've ever met. Now, and then my friends would say, wow, you're insulting us. You're basically saying that we're dumber than you. I'm like, yeah, well, you're obviously not that dumb because you figured out what I meant. But that was when I was young, and I've since met a lot of people in this world, and I've concluded that I cannot say that I'm smarter than everyone because there are some amazing people out there who do incredible things, including my co-author, Reed. So what I will say is that the reason that Reed and I are partners and collaborators is that we are both very smart, but that our intelligence is actually able to be complementary. So, for example, Reed is absolutely smarter on a whole variety of subjects. When I am talking about things like artificial intelligence or autonomous vehicles or something like that, I am just basically talking about stuff that Reed has taught me because he is far more of an expert in these things than I am. And he has done, I'm just basking in secondhand knowledge. On the other hand, when it comes to things like what is going on in popular culture, or what is happening in the world of sports, or which Kardashian is seeing who or having whose baby, I am absolutely much smarter than Reed on those things. And it's important to have that balance because frankly, we write these books together and we use examples, and we have to make examples that are accessible to other folks. And I often view my role in life as being a translator. I think, very good at understanding a lot of different things. And so I will translate for people. And so I'm like, well, if we want to translate this concept can be described in terms of this relatively simple analogy. And Reed is not a simple analogy guy. He is a complicated framework guy. And it's important to be able to translate the two. Let's see. So, and do you invest in the one follow-up question? So I'm gonna say that because we want to get to the pitches, I'm gonna answer the rest of the questions that are in the chat right now. But then we are going to get back to then I'm going to go and jump into the pitches. And so I've got 2 volunteers because Hari has also volunteered to pitch. So I've got 2 volunteers, so we got enough time to do 2 of them. Well, I'll answer the rest of the questions that are there right now. So do you invest in founders who are not from the Ivy League or Stanford, et cetera? Yes, absolutely. The fact that you went to the Ivy League or Stanford, all it reveals is that you were able to go to the Ivy League or Stanford. Yes, it means you're probably pretty smart. It also probably implies that you came from a relatively wealthy family or had certain advantages. That doesn't necessarily make it mean that you're infallible. And the follow-up question to that is, do people who go to average universities, are people who go to average universities also smart? Yeah, because you go to average universities for different reasons. I'll give you an example. One of my friends who I met when I was on that TV show is a woman named Jackie Boehm, who is an anesthesiologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. She's working hard right now, treating COVID-19 patients and being intubating people, and very heroic, incredible person. And she is a graduate of the University of Central Florida, the Golden Knights. And you would say, wow, University of Central Florida, is she smart? Well, why did she go to the University of Central Florida? Well, the context is that she immigrated to the United States along with her family from the Dominican Republic when she was 2 years old. She's the first member of her family to ever go to college, and she grew up in Orlando, which means that the local college, the place where she could go without spending a huge pile of money because her family didn't have it, was the University of Central Florida. And she excelled at the University of Central Florida and then went to Harvard Medical School and is now a doctor at Brigham and Women's and has done all these different things. By the way, she was also, among other things, a champion weightlifter, runner-up Miss Florida, and a black belt in martial arts. All these different things that she's done. And, is she's smart? Obviously she is. But the context was there was a reason why she went to the University of Central Florida, and you have to understand the full story behind these things. Let's see. Next question. There's a question. You mentioned giving sessions in Copenhagen, Mexico, the United States. How much do you change your stories as you go to different countries? Have you noticed any cultural differences which require changes? Yes. So the stories do have to change based on the cultural context. So I'll give you a couple of examples. And I've been to Asia and other places as well. So for example, Japan is a place where there is a very different culture than in the United States. It's less of a raw, beat your chest kind of culture. And so the way I tell my stories is slightly more reserved. I'm going to try to echo the audience's mood. Similarly, if I'm giving a session in Copenhagen, interestingly enough, the Danish have a term for basically, standing out. It's like the Japanese, the nail that stands out gets hammered down. And they have a mindset, which is they don't want to stand out too much. They don't want people to think that they think they're better than them. Well, that's opposed to the United States, where everyone wants to think that everyone wants everyone to think that they're better than them. So it's definitely a change. And what you do is you should try to talk with people in the different places to understand the cultural context. And that's always been helpful. Usually what I do is, fortunately, when I'm invited somewhere, they've usually seen me speak in the United States, so they're able to give me some guidance on how to change the stories. All right, so we have 9 minutes left. Let's go ahead. And I believe that Praveen, you were the volunteer who got in first. So if we can find Praveen and unmute him or her,
Sure.
let's go ahead and do that.
Praveen, I think you can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah. So am I audible?
You are.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, Chris. Hi, Nick. Yes, I am anxious now. All right. So my company's name is Frank. And what Frank helps do is it helps create data sets at businesses. So it's like when I went out to do my market research, when I started out, we figured that there's lots of companies, especially small and medium businesses in India and Asia, to be intact. They don't have access to these complex, tools that do data analysis and anything. So in essence, there were billion-dollar companies that were not doing any big, financial data analysis as good as in America. So we went out and we figured this is a problem. And there were incumbents like, very big companies that were not doing a good work to solve this thing. So we created a software as a service platform, and now we are running through it. So what we are trying to solve is this expensive, hard, and complex setup that people have to, do on the backstage, that we take care of it and we let them do the analysis and kind of put them on a path to, artificial intelligence or machine learning for anything, a data set is required. Yeah. So.
All right. Perfect. All right. So I'm gonna run it back, and it's called Frank, right?
Yeah, Frank, like
right.
San Francisco Frank. Yeah.
Got it. Great.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Praveen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Frank. So I want you to think about how big businesses make decisions. You figure that making decisions is the most important thing that their leadership does. And hopefully they're doing this based on data. They've got data sets, they're able to learn from it, they're going to run AI, they're able to do all these things. And by doing so, they're going to be able to make better decisions faster and be more profitable. There's only one problem. A lot of the world's biggest companies don't have the infrastructure to actually apply any of these data science techniques. And I'm thinking of companies in emerging markets like India and the rest of Asia. Because these companies have arisen relatively recently, they don't have the data science infrastructure that companies in the United States do. And as a result, they're basically flying blind. They're not sure what they're making their decisions based on. Now, what if there was possible for them to put them on an even footing with the most wealthy and accomplished companies in the United States, to have data sets, proprietary data sets that will deliver value, not just for making their own decisions, but for training neural networks, for creating new AI-based products. Basically, if you think about the amount of data that's available over in India and in Asia based on the number of consumers, it may even be an order of magnitude larger than the amount of data available for US companies. Well, what Frank does is we actually unlock all of that. We have a software as a service platform that allows those companies to upgrade their data infrastructure into creating data sets that are suitable for business intelligence, training data, AI, and the like. And by doing this, we allow them to make better decisions, which make them more profitable, and will ultimately provide enough data, more data, than the data from the developed world, allowing all of us as a whole to create better decisions and better AI apps.
Wow, that's nice. Thank you so much.
And
so,
you see, all I did was same exact things you said. I especially remember when you said their billion-dollar businesses are unable to do this. Like, that was the fact that sort of stuck out of my head. That's why I emphasized it.
Got it. All right. So just as another question, does my pitch seem like a pitch or like more like a problem solution thing?
It was still more of a problem solution thing. What you want to do is you want to get to the point. The problem is that many of the biggest companies in the emerging markets and emerging world do not have a data science infrastructure. This is both a problem and an opportunity. It's a problem because they don't have the ability to leverage this, but it's an opportunity for Frank to come in and provide them with a simple solution that allows them to build that data infrastructure and start leveraging their data, which, by the way, ultimately will be much larger as a data set than companies in the emerging world because of the number of customers and users.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Would you invest in this?
So I'd have to look at more into it, but it certainly sounds interesting. And I also, by the way, know friends who are investors in India who would be very interested because they are more capable of investing on the ground. All right. So we have Harry. Thank you so much, Praveen. We have Harry. Last one. We got 4 minutes. So Harry, if you can unmute yourself.
Hey, Chris. Thanks. The promise that you didn't know anything about Frank before. That's pretty good.
Thank you.
Hey, Dennis. Good to see you. I'm a long-term associate with the SP Forum, and been here quite a bit. But this is my first time as an entrepreneur. So all right, here we go. So my name is Hari Subramaniam. I'm a founder CEO of Tulsi Technologies Inc.
What's the name of the company again?
Tulsi Technologies Inc.
2C?
Tulsi, Tulsi. Tulsi Technologies.
Okay, Tulsi. Tulsi. Okay, great.
Yep. So we've all been here in this situation. We have tried to go buy something at a particular business. Transact with a designer, with an architect, or for that matter, attend a paid session with Chris Yeh. And we've all kind of done our due diligence. We're all informed audience. We go and read, hey, how does this business do? How does Chris do in the setting, etc. We've all been there. But then many times we have seen, we've had an underwhelming performance because, hey, for whatever reason, the last delivery has not been great. So we've been underwhelmed with the performance of the business, performance of the architect, whatever it is. So So what we realized is, yes, you can be good, diligent in understanding what the business is doing. We can read reviews, etc. But then they are broken. They don't tell you how the business is doing in the recent past. So in order to do a better job of serving customers with the right information, so you can easily understand who's doing well compared to who, we said there's got to be a better way, right? There's got to be a better way because we have enough data, we have enough resources and power to crunch all of the data. But why are we not there yet? Why do customers still go to places and be underwhelmed with the with the service? So we figured there is a solid way to solve this problem, and we all own credit cards. We all interact with banks, right? So what do banks know about you? Banks know that, hey, Chris A or Denise or Hari have been diligent with their money based on their past performance with the credit. So they say, okay, I can give $1 million more to Hari. I can give $1 million more to Chris because he's going to return this on time with interest, right? So the past predictor of discipline is a good, the past performance of the financial discipline is a good predictor of future performance. So we applied the same technique to service businesses. Past predictor of service quality is a very good predictor of future performance. So we said, why don't we marry the two and create a model that says, numerically, how am I doing with respect to my cohort of businesses here? And that solves a lot of problems. It makes life easy for the users to quickly say who's better at who. They can take my businesses. And it's also better for businesses. Hey, who am I competing with? How do I compete better? That's the problem that we're solving. And this is global. It's not just SMB.
One clarifier. Does the data that you use to make these evaluations, does it come from the banks and credit cards, or is it information you're gathering separately?
We exclusively gather from the customer. Very good question. What we realize is if I get information from a biased party, and a biased party is anyone part of the merchant value chain or the business value chain, it taints the data. So all of our data is collected from customer feedback.
Okay, got it. All right, great. And again, it's Hari and Tulsi.
Correct.
All right. I'm Hari. I am the founder and CEO of Tulsi. Now, I think that obviously one of the biggest things that all of us fear is making the wrong decision when it comes to a purchase or selecting a vendor. And so as a result, we go through all these lengths in order to make sure we're picking the right one. We may read different reviews. We may ask around on Facebook, on Twitter, say, hey, who knows a good plumber? Or, hey, does this product work really well? And it's amazing that so much of our spending is conditioned on these really crude and primitive ways of looking at it. Now, a lot of vendors like Amazon have, of course, tried to use reviews to solve this problem. But here's the big issue with those reviews. There's no focus on what the temporal nature of it is. Just because a product was good 6 months ago doesn't mean that it's good today. Or just because someone was delivering good service 6 months ago doesn't mean they're still delivering good service. And so what Tulsi does is it places a much greater emphasis on the temporal side of it. Let's think about what the implications of this are. Well, if all of a sudden, when you're looking for a service, you know that so many people in the past week, in fact, got a good result, or so many people in the past week were satisfied, then you can have a much greater degree of confidence that the thing that you're buying is going to line up with those expectations. So the way Tulsi does this is we're gathering data directly from the customer. We are not relying on other people in the value chain who are biased. We're just going straight to the people who have no incentive and who are going to give accurate information. And we take that information, we run it through our algorithms to highly privilege the most recent data. And we'll reveal transparently to people like you and I who are looking to make these decisions just how much data there is and how confident we can feel in that rating.
That's great. Learned.
Thank you. And again, appreciate being willing to come on. And also, I'm guessing that before the pandemic, you actually had a full head of hair, but you just decided to shave it in order to be more efficient during this time.
6 months of the year, this is the look.
There you go. All right. So I'm just going to answer one more question before we go because we're slightly over time, but this was a great question. Hi, Chris. What kind of camera and audio setup are you using? You sound and look so clear. So this is important for all of you who are doing these Zoom conferences constantly. So the setup that I use for doing something like this is I actually have a Logitech 1080p webcam. It's really hard to get these days. And I went to go buy one. It's like, oh my God, it's going to take months to get here. But then when I went to Amazon to buy it, I discovered I bought one in 2015 and forgotten about it. So I dug around in the closet. I found the webcam, and that's what I'm using. That's why I have this relatively clear look. Now, then part of it is the camera, but the other part of it is lighting. So I'm in a room which has natural light, but I also have two other light sources that I have turned on. This was very important when I gave my presentation at 7 a.m. this morning because the natural light was not there yet. So I actually have lighting equipment that I bought off of Amazon. There's basically these LED lights that people use for like semi-professional video shoots. And I have them coming from multiple angles, so I'm well illuminated whenever I do things. Like the way Nick is illuminated, for example, is very dramatic because like one half of his face is in shadow and one half is in light because it's based on natural light. But it's actually better to have a more even lighting. So that's why I have the lighting set up. And then finally, from an audio perspective, one of the important things is I don't use wireless headphones or anything like that. The wireless headphones, they're great for listening, but the transmission of audio is not as good. The thing I'm actually using, if you can believe it, this is a wired JBL/Harman set of earbuds. Wired earbuds with a decent microphone are actually pretty good. This one, and it all depends on what I'm doing. So like the really good quality ones, the best quality comes from wearing a headset with a USB connection. But the problem is you look like a dork when you do that. And no offense to anyone out there wearing headsets. But for a presenter like me, I kind of like, yeah, don't worry about heart. But you kind of look a bit silly when you're doing that. And so instead, what I do is I use these wired earbuds. They're relatively small. I wear dark colored clothing, plug it directly into the computer, and that allows me to get better sound quality. And by the way, these JBL earbuds, I think that they're JBL 100s or something like that. I ended up getting them on sale for $8. So you don't need a lot of money on earbuds necessarily. You just got to test a couple of different earbuds and find ones that work for you.
Great, great. Well, I think that about is the end of our time here. Chris, thank you so much once again for all your comments and insights into dealing with this strange time and making us better Zoom presenters and all your tips about storytelling.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I love an audience.
All right. And as I was saying at the beginning of this, this is recorded, and we will have it available on the startupedia.info website and through our Silicon Valley Forum portal as well. Chris is joining us again in 1 month for our next webinar on finding the right co-founders, advisors, and building an all-star team. That is on June 4th. So please go to the Silicon Valley Forum website for more info on that and to register. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thank you very much,
everyone, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, our brave volunteers, Praveen and Hari.
Thanks a lot. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
Take care.
Thank you.